All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you're watching from. We're here back at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, Washington for our monthly interview and performance series. I think we were gone last week, but happy to be back, or last month, I should say. And today we have the wonderful pleasure of having the great pianist and composer and arranger, David Lee Joyner, with us today. I think that we were just discussing this before we got started, and I looked and saw when the last time we did one of these, and it's been 3 years. It doesn't seem that long. So, David, welcome. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you, Kareem. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. Before we get rolling, of course, we'd like to thank our sponsors, and that, of course, is the Museum of Glass, KNKX, Ted Brown Music, Tacoma Creates, Titus Will Cars, and Edward Jones Financial Consultant Rick Gray. As per normal, what we'll do is I'll interview David for about 45 minutes or so, grill him with a interrogation, and then open things up for questions. So if you have any questions for David or myself related to piano or composing or the music business or any of that kind of stuff, please let us know. And if you're watching online, feel free to put stuff in the comments. We'll do our best to get to them now, and if we can't, we can always get to them after the fact. So don't be shy with questions. Okay, David.
Yes.
Welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to see you, Kareem.
Yeah, likewise. It's been 3 years, and we were talking a little bit about what's been going on, because it doesn't seem like it's been that long. But when last we met, you were still, I think, living out kind of by Hoodsport. Yeah.
Yeah, out near Shelton.
Okay, and now you're in, you said, Sumner.
Right.
And busy teaching, playing, composing, arranging, doing workshops. And we were talking a little bit about what inspired the move, because you had moved out there while you were still teaching. You ran the jazz program at PLU for many, many years.
18 years.
18 years. And we're not going to go too much into it. We did another interview with David, as I said, 3 years ago. There's a lot of how you got started playing and all that. We're not going to really touch on that too much today.
Okay.
But what inspired the move from out on the sound out into Sumner?
Yes. Well, of course, I think everybody had seismic changes during the pandemic. And so, 2020 was not so good for a lot of reasons. And, of course, we were all gigless, and it didn't matter where you were because we were all doing Zoom presentations anyway. And it's kind of a curious story. I had begun teaching since retiring from PLU, teaching through the community music program at UPS one evening a week. So I was teaching one evening, and I always kept a speaker that I used to hook iReal Pro up on top of a cabinet. And they got those old yellow school chairs, that I would stand on to get the speaker. Well, the old thing collapsed under me. The legs just broke. And, I came crashing down to the floor, and, it kind of, hurt my ribs a little bit. And, well, whatever. I shook it off and continued to teach. But I told the office the next day, I said, well, this chair broke. Make sure you get it out of there so nobody tries to sit on it or anything. And they said, well, did you get hurt? And I said, well, I got to get a little bruised in the ribs, But and they said, well, we've got insurance and everything. Go get x-ray, make sure you didn't crack a rib. So I went and got an x-ray, and the doctor in Shelton calls me, like, on the car phone and says, well, your ribs are fine, but you got cancer in your kidney. And okay, so you need to get that taken out. So I found a urologist, and in June they did the robot surgery, and so I lost my left kidney. And then a month before that, my wife, Pam Deacon Joyner, we were sitting there having lunch one day, and she coughed a little bit and had blood in her napkin and everything. And so in July, we found out she had lung cancer. And so she passed. She didn't make it in December of 2020. So, of course, that was a big reset. And then I cruised along until May, and the pandemic began to let up a bit. And I get notified by Greta Matassa, the great Seattle jazz vocalist. And I've played with her on occasion over 20 years, and she did the what was then the KPLU Holiday Jam at PLU a couple of times. And, it was always great playing with her, but she had a wonderful pianist, Darren Clendenin, that she'd worked with for 26 years. And so circumstances moved him to Portland And so she asked me to do this summer clinic she had been doing for over 15 years in Fairbanks, I think kind of, trying me out a little bit. And she also does, a huge business teaching. She teaches by Zoom all the way to New York. And I think that had a great deal of bearing on getting just the right person, because all of her students, which are mostly middle-aged to older women, a few young, but they were very used to Darren and his demeanor. And, they're nervous enough as it is. And so you got to, have kind of the right thing as an accompanist and, dealing with them. And fortunately, the first workshop I did with her, they took to me right away. And so all in all, it worked out pretty well. But I was wondering, with all the pianists in the 206, I hardly ever played a gig in Seattle up to that point, how it came to me. And it was actually a good bit of time later that I asked her husband, Clipper Anderson, well, how is it that it came to me? And he said, well, and it made perfect sense. Clipper and Mark, her regular bassist and drummer, were my faculty, jazz faculty at PLU, and we'd had a faculty jazz ensemble, and we'd been playing together, recitals and whatnot, for a number of years. And so Clipper told Greta, he said, well, you got a built-in trio right here. We've been playing with David for ages. And again, every time, on the few occasions, sometimes even once every couple of years, I'd play with Greta. And, we always had a marvelous time. She seemed to like my playing and everything. And so anyway, she checked it out, see how the students thought about it and everything. And so that's been sort of a staple for me ever since. Greta works quite a bit, both in educational circles as well as performing. In fact, I got a gig with her at the Royal Room right after this. So, yeah. And of course,
so that spurred the move to Sumner, or?
Well, yes. And so, yeah, that gets into, another little great part of my life. It's actually, I think, kind of a sweet story. So I start picking up all this work, and I'm driving 45 minutes just to get to I-5 to start to the gig, And I thought, well, it is what it is. But eventually I started thinking, man, I've got to get back into, the city, a city. But prices had gotten so high, and seemed like, all of that sort of closed the door behind me. And I thought, well, how am I going to do this? I don't think I can afford to, even living in an apartment. That had gone crazy. And, well, I can tell you when it was. It was August 28th, 2021. And what used to be Hell's Kitchen over there on 6th, and it became the Essence Lounge. And Dennis Ellis, God rest his soul, was trying to find another B-sharp venue. And so my old high school buddy, Nathan Breedlove, asked me to play that night. And it was him and Phil Sparks and Jamel Nance. And so anyway, it was just a hoot. It was, great playing in there. But a lady named Athena Robbins, who was sort of one of the Tacoma groupies. A couple of times we had played at Spanish Ballroom and Craft 19 in Sumner, and she would, be in attendance, Frontier Lounge and everything. So she showed up, and I didn't recognize her at first. She was in the dark when everybody's in a mask, And well, anyway, to cut out some of the details, I went over an intermission. Hey, Athena, is that you? What you been doing on the during the pandemic? And told me a pretty horrible story about stuff that happened to her. Well, anyway, eventually we became an item, and so she is a total polymath. I mean, everything from technology to the tool belt thing to whatever. So she helped me fix up my place in Grapeview for sale. Mark Ivester's wife was my realtor. And So we got the place all fixed up, sold it in 3 days for the asking price, and so I moved in with her in Sumner, and it's been absolutely fantastic because it's right there at 167, and I can just hop on there, and I'm equidistant from a gig in Olympia or in Seattle. It's just worked out beautifully.
So if musicians didn't know, you're close to the scene now. So
I am, and I want to make that very clear because some people still think I live out there, and and I would have people say, well, I wanted to call you, but I thought, well, it'd be a drag for you to drive that far, so I say, well, hey, that's my problem, I'll let me be the one to turn down the work if I want it. But yeah, now make it really clear that I'm back in Pierce County.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you, given your musical upbringing in Memphis, Memphis, correct?
That's correct.
All
Yes.
right. And then I don't remember the whole lineage. It's in the other interview, but teaching, collegiate level for 18 years, still being involved with a lot of these things, and knowing life as a musician, life as a composer, making a living as those things.
Mm-hmm.
What is your feeling about people attending college now for the asking price of what tuition is versus, like many people, if they're taking on student loan debt? What does that look like, and what are your thoughts and opinions after coming up in the system, teaching in that system?
Yeah.
And I know this is a massive topic of conversation, and there's many heated,
Sure.
strong feelings about it. But as from your perspective, how do you feel about that?
Well, I have, actually a lot of thoughts and a lot of feelings about it. So, here on the fly, I'm trying to distill it, And of course, and I bring this up in addition to the 18 years at PLU, I taught another 14 years at University in North Texas.
For people that don't know, that university is a very well-known, prestigious school for music and particularly the jazz.
Oh, yeah.
Great history. So, go
Yeah,
on.
and so to your question, a lot of what I would do in the latter part of the summer at North Texas was freshman advising. And so they would channel the prospective jazz students, jazz majors over to me. And a lot of times we got really bright kids, academically and everything else. And their parents are kind of wringing their hand because little Johnny wants to be a music major with a concentration in jazz. So they would ask me, what is Johnny going to do with a music degree? And Dan Hurley and I used to talk about this quite a bit. And so one very truthful answer is you will leave this university with a diploma, just like everybody else in the university. You will have a bachelor's degree from an accredited university. And so that has value no matter where your career takes you. That a lot of people looking for a job are, just looking, do you have a degree of any kind? And I also came to find out that if you say you're a musician, and I've got a story about that too. I got a really good one. But if you say you're a musician, well, then you're maybe a ne'er-do-well. But if you're a music major, I think a lot of people in the business world recognize that music is an extremely hard academic and practical thing to do, that it's like getting a medical degree or a law degree. And so if you had the wherewithal to push through that, it says something about you, about your thought processes and everything else, particularly in the computer programming world and the tech writing. That's what a lot of North Texas students, if they didn't pursue music, ended up going into that. So I think somebody pursuing a music degree probably has to consider the same things that any other prospective college student does. Like you say, it's getting more expensive all the time. And will this create some value for me if I have this degree? Is what my dad used to call your union card, that you've got a degree and that will give you a leg up in whatever business world you're going to go into. It was a no-brainer for me. I mean, things were a lot cheaper back then, but I always had my sights on teaching college. And I knew that you had to go straight through and get what we call a terminal degree. It sounds like a disease. but you had to get a doctoral degree just to make the first cut. And so I went, straight through and did that. And then, again, so fortunate that I got the job at North Texas just as I was finishing up. So there was no walk in the wilderness, but it also means I hadn't stepped out of college since 1974. So a lot of time being in that culture, being in that world. So for the professional musician, I think it just depends on what you're going into and what the school has to offer. And, will it work out where you'll get your money's worth out of it? But, yeah.
Well, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, we have a lot of similar, we know a lot of the same musicians. We're in the same scene. The amount of musicians that are solely making a career out of just playing performances.
Yes.
There always seems to be either someone like Greta. I mean, you have to be performing and teaching, and not only just the performing aspect of it, but doing the business aspect, which is booking the gigs, promoting the gigs. I mean, maybe some musicians have the luxury of making enough money to hire a publicist and an agent and the rest of that, but that's a lot of income to spend for that.
Yeah.
What, in your opinion, in your mind, how many musicians are solely making a living for themselves just performing, just solely performing?
Yeah. None come to my mind that don't at least do a little private teaching during the day just on their own, or doing clinics or something to that effect. And you're right. The trick in the university, if I'm picking up on your question the right way, is that the business part of it still isn't taught. And whenever that was brought up, the answer of why that's not supplied was actually quite simple, that everybody that's on the faculty was just trained to be a college faculty person and to teach clarinet or teach jazz piano or direct a jazz band, and they don't know anything about the business because they don't deal in it. The university gives them their daily bread, and so they didn't know anything about it, the legal aspect of it. So a lot of times, they would get a music business lawyer as an adjunct to come in and, teach, something like that. But today, it's all about media. Everything is about being tech savvy, about having a huge social media presence. I even saw this morning, I like to watch CBS Sunday Morning, is Berkeley in California, not the other Berkeley, and several other universities have teaching assistants teaching a course, not even a music course, on Taylor Swift, just analyzing what her business strategy is. She's a billionaire. And it's also timely that you bring that up. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Hot Springs, Arkansas to visit my daughter and to catch the total eclipse. I didn't know that. I just went to visit her when I had a week off, and she said, by the way, there's going to be well, she had me speak to her Rotary Club that Thursday morning. And she said, you got about 15 minutes, and, what would be a topic. And so that brings me to my thing about, whether you're a music major or you're a musician in the business world. So the name of my presentation was, Isn't That Dangerous? Demystifying the music profession. And it came from a few years ago, not too many years ago, I decided I should take out a life insurance, like a term life insurance policy for Pam in case anything suddenly happened to me. And so my retirement advisor hooked me up with a life insurance company like out of Alabama or something. I had to do a phone medical interview. So they ask you all the questions just like if you were filling out the thing, family health history and then this, that, and the other. And so then she says, are you employed? And I said, well, I'm a retired professor, but I have my own business now. Well, what do you do? I'm a professional musician. There's a pause. The next thing out of her mouth was, isn't that dangerous? And I said, lady, it's not all sex, drugs, and rock and roll, And so that inspired my presentation for the Rotary. So I started with Taylor Swift and kind of went down the food chain right down to somebody busking with a guitar case open. But I showed, there's a lot of things you never think about. You just think of somebody playing in a biker bar, and so I said, okay, so you got Taylor Swift and John Williams, and then how about Robert Russell Bennett that orchestrated all the musicals you've ever known, and then we moved down to house bands at Motown and at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, or the Wrecking Crew in L.A. Okay, so there's another aspect. How about the people that are playing in the pit for musicals and ballets and operas, not just the symphony orchestra? And there's the conductor, kick it back up again, And then I got into, of course, the educational businesses, and there, you're probably going to have a degree, right down to elementary music. And so I said, it's quite varied, and so, but the business is a big part of it. I don't know if you're aware of this guy, Ari Herstand. He's written a book, How to Make It in the New Music Business, and I get a email from him, blogs and things like that. But it's the definitive book for those college courses that have a music business thing, about how to handle everything from contracts to sync licensing. But apparently, it's all really about media. And say with Taylor Swift as an example, every time she does her toenails or makes a latte, she puts it out there. I don't want everybody in my business, that much. But one of the nice things about Herstand's book is he said, if you just want to stay local and, you're older, you're not going to be, a teenage heartthrob or something. It's how to navigate it even within that, And so, of course, that's kind of... where I'm at. I'm kind of the yeoman side man, and a lot of people know about me in that way. But, how to push myself as a headliner, I guess you'd call it, and so that can be tricky, and, get your website up and getting your media. And like I say, that takes time if you're going to do it yourself, and it takes money if you're not. So it's that old joke about a band spending $7,000 on gear to get a $70 gig, So,
Well, I'm curious. Growing up, you did a fair amount of classical music as well, correct?
No, not really.
No? Okay.
No. I took some piano lessons in high school at Memphis State University, now University of Memphis, makes it sound bigger. And Don Freund, I want to drop his name because he's really great. He's been at Indiana University for decades now, but he was a wunderkind, 23-year-old doctorate from Eastman, and took the job at Memphis State. And I took piano lessons from him in high school, and then continued to study composition with him as a composition major when I graduated. But I was a very poor classical student. I learned some pieces, but at the same time I was getting heavily into jazz and working more on that. And that's one of the reasons I chose composition too, because you didn't have that heavy applied thing. You didn't have to take a lot of applied piano. I just kind of wanted to play the piano the way I wanted to play it, and composition was what a lot of jazz musicians were doing. I would say, if you look back over some of the jazz musicians that got degrees, in a lot of cases, either composition or ethnomusicology, because for a long time, the academic study of jazz was considered folk music. And so, a lot of guys like the Richard Watermans and, several other the really good that was my PhD, ethnomusicology, so I got to know who the big names were in ethno scholarship, and a lot of them had backgrounds in jazz. And so, but anyway, to answer your question, I really didn't have a lot of heavy classical playing training, but of course all the academics, we all had to have, music history and theory and things like that.
You mentioned something earlier that piqued my interest because I know that it's still around. Now, you mentioned, having your union card and working.
Yeah.
You're a little bit older than me. That's not a dig, but I'm curious, when did you have a union card and get performances through the union versus, I mean, because there's still a union here in Seattle
Mm-hmm.
that's I'm curious what it was like, 20, 30, 40 years ago versus what it's like now, the comparison in your perspective.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll talk about the Memphis scene because that's where I got it. So as soon as I finished high school, there was a guy in town, really good musician. His name was Perry Wilson. And he used to drive all the way to Senatobia, Mississippi. It was probably about a 45-minute drive to teach high school. Maybe he's a high school band director, and he played bass. And so Holiday Inn was founded in Memphis. That's where it started. And there was a flagship, the Holiday Inn Rivermont. It was like a several-story Holiday Inn on the Mississippi River, really nice place. And it had a real nice restaurant on the top. So Perry called me just right after I graduated, and he said, I've got this steady gig at the Rivermont playing for this group of ex-beauty pageant queens called the Beautiful Collection, and they do a floor show twice a night, and then we just play dance music in between, but you got to join the union. So I was not quite 18. That was like in the summer of '74, and my 18th birthday was August 27th. So he said, you got to join the union. So my dad and I went down to the local 71 to the musicians union, and he had to sign for me, because I couldn't enter into all covenants, public and private. and they swore me in, and I got my union card. And so at that time, there were, I would say the union was quite active. You got to remember that, Stax Records, was there. There was a big jingle place that I worked for when I came back to Memphis in 1980. It was as a vocalist. But if I did playing sessions, that was union. And through that, it was just like making records, that there was the... what was that darn thing called? The pension fund that you pay into, recording industry thing. I can't remember the acronym for it anymore, but like, I could get enough of a little residual from that to, say, pay off a credit card, and Tom Scott would buy a house, something like that. And then any big headliners that came to town, like I played for Bob Hope, Rich Little, Henry Mancini, blah, blah, blah. And so they would want union, musicians. And so it was, a good thing to be, in the union in Memphis. And I kept my union membership when I moved to Texas. To Denton, Dallas, and Fort Worth had sort of a blanket union, and I stayed in that for a good while, but I wasn't getting too many union things, and I didn't want to get fined and stuff for working with non-union musicians and everything. So sometime in the mid-'90s, I dropped it.
This is while you were in Texas.
Yeah,
so,
while I was in Texas.
So you began in the 70s, 80s with the union, and then the 90s you didn't see as many benefits. And I'm not talking trash against the union. I'm a union member here, but
yeah, that's
rarely get a performance from. I'm just curious your perspective based on your experience with it.
Yeah, well, and sometimes there would be the thing like the guy that was the union. He was a real climber, wanted to be a union president, and he'd come up to you at a gig, and the way he put it, to ask if you were in the union, say, "Are you my brother?" His Texas accent, "You my brother?" And if you were, and he knew you were playing a non-union gig or something, But on the other hand, say you did it union, and you got your contract, and somebody jilted you, and you'd go and tell him, he'd say, "Well, what do you want me to do about it?" To that point, he'd swear, we'll bring in a 747 full of lawyers and get you your money. But ultimately, he's kind of found it didn't have any teeth, Oh, and also, I forgot to say, through those years, I was also local number one. And you wonder, where would local number one be? New York, L.A., Cincinnati. And it was in the Kroger building. It looked like a giant bathroom wall. It was like this blue and white tile on the building. And they had the greatest bumper sticker in there. It said, "Kiss a musician's wife, they never get to dance." I'll never forget that. And there, being in the union, there were some union things that would come up. The big one was I had a graduate assistantship at Cincinnati that would kind of pay the nut through the academic year, but in the summer it got cut off. And so I played at Kings Island, a big theme park, about 35 miles northeast of Cincinnati. And they had one union show. They had just a fair, musical little 45-minute show that they would do. And over the years, as technology came about, what they would do is they would go to New York and do a midnight session, pay some guys under the table, and track the whole show. They'd play a tape, just like they were moving to do in Las Vegas, right? That's when the bottom fell out of that land of milk and honey. But Kings Island had signed like a 10-year contract with a union so as bad as they wanted to just replace everybody with a tape, they had to keep like a skeleton crew. And so we had about 10 musicians in the pit, and so again, that was a union gig because they were, in a contract with a union. And so they would just pull down the tracks of the instruments that they had live in the pit. And of course, when the tape machine broke, we saved the day because we just keep playing, So that was my other big union experience.
Taking another left turn here.
Yeah.
This is more of a piano-centric thing that maybe people understand or don't understand, other
Yeah.
pianists that are watching. The role of a pianist playing solo versus multiple musicians versus a big band. A lot of people think, well, I'm just going to go and just play. But you have to view these things differently, at least in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think
you
I
are
am.
not wrong.
But I know that you do a lot of solo work. You do a lot of your own, leading your own groups, duos, trios, quartets, whatever have you, and also accompanying other people and arranging for large ensembles.
Yeah.
So can you maybe talk about the function and the role of the piano in these different things? And then this is a universe unto itself.
Yeah.
So maybe a few words about that in your opinion.
Sure. Well, I say I start with my teaching approach is when I have a student come in that wants to learn to navigate jazz piano. And of course, usually the shock they're going through, what I see in the schools is, little Susie or little Billy that's had a little bit of classical training, and they stick them in the jazz band because they play piano. Just like, well, I'm just asking you to do what you already do. Play. Here's your parts, kid. And that's kind of what happened to me, And so this is, I guess, my little, finger wagging at the educational system is that music education programs to train music teachers is still, for the choral side, it's choir and choir conducting. And in the instrumental side, it's either, orchestral strings and stuff, or, more in my world, wind band, wind playing instrumentalists. That's the conducting they learn, it's the repertoire they learn, it's their experience they learn. And so they may never play in a jazz band, but even if they do, they still have someone, directing them and stuff. But to get up in front and make it happen, that's a big piece that's missing. And I think what any music ed program, particularly if it's going to be, high school level above, maybe even junior high, is they should have a rhythm section methods class. The closest example I saw of that was I was on a sabbatical one time, and North Texas and Indiana were always, who's the biggest? I've got 4 more students than you do. The two largest public university music schools. So I'd always hear about Indiana and meet people from there. And like I say, my teacher, Don Freund, had been there for ages. So I went to do a little reconnaissance. I went to Bloomington, stayed at Don's house, and snooped around. And they had a music ed class, flute players, clarinet players, everything else in the world. And so they went in there and just handed out B flat and E flat and C parts. It didn't matter what it sounded like. And kids would take turn getting in front and have to direct them. Meanwhile, she'd pull the flute player out and set him at the drum set to do a drum set skills test. And usually it was just, can you play a swing beat? Can you play a bossa nova? Or play a little bit on the bass? But, it's like 4 Martians landed over here. They don't have any idea what to tell these people. And so thank goodness, between just being an autodidact and having people that took me under their wing, most especially, dear James Williams, who always recognized, up-and-coming talent and mentored everybody from me to Jeff Keyser, and beyond, that show you things and, just kind of figure it out. But, I wanted to, kind of fast lane some of these pianists. So one of the things that I made it a point to do right after I retired from full-time teaching at PLU was I heard they had a community music program at UPS, which I think is a great recruiting tool. It gets kids on campus and everything. But also, it was just so accommodating for me. They manage all the intake and the money and everything else. You just go in there and teach your students and leave. It's great. And I just get to talk about piano, no faculty meetings, no nothing, And so, okay, so I'm teaching these kids. Now, to get to your point, basically it's kind of a 2-tier thing when I'm teaching them how to get around the piano. I say there's your solo texture and there's your ensemble texture. So this little thing where Darren Fall had the greatest expression for this for comping, throwing punches, just where you're just dabbing, as opposed to your open voicings when you're doing a solo thing. So I try to make sure that the students experience both sets of voicings, open voicings, and where you just have these 2 fingers to be able to play the melody, and this pinky has to catch the bass, as opposed to just your 2 and 3 note shells. So I make sure that they experience that. And I've got a fairly advanced student at UPS that they had their final concert the other night, and Tracy always likes to play a little sappy goodbye song to the seniors, so he's doing I'll Be Seeing You in all the old familiar places. And my student was able to hang and just played all rubato. And I said, and if it's anything I've learned, a valuable role for a pianist, a skill to have, is to be able to particularly play rubato, like for verses, or you're just doing a whole tune out of tempo, and just to be able to just follow the singer or the instrumentalist, And in fact, Greta had a rubato clinic just a couple of weeks ago to teach the singers how to sort of lead and, and for me to follow and everything. So we had a whole big talk about that. So, yeah, there's your solo situation. And also, say a solo gig in a restaurant or a lounge as opposed to a concert solo piano gig. And for that, a great training for me was on I think it's on the Concord label. They had this series called the Maybach Recital Series. And it's this, I guess this architect built this beautiful home out in the Bay Area and built a little rustic wooden 30-seat recital hall for his daughter. Great Yamaha piano in there. And so every great pianist you can think of, made a solo album, playing this piano. And so playing innocuous wallpaper solo piano as opposed to really being interesting, probably meaning virtuoso, then that's another thing. So, there's the guys like Dick Hyman and this amazing Polish pianist, very classically trained, Adam Makowicz, is just a monster, playing solo piano. And then, of course, somebody like Brad Meldau who can, cover things like that too. And then here's some of the pianists that you don't hear play solo concerts so often, and how they negotiate that. So I learned a ton on solo piano texture from listening to a number of those.
A lot of the, you mentioned the 206 piano players.
Yeah.
A lot of the ones that were here in the Northwest, and it's been interesting to me, doing these things for the last 3-4 years, these interviews, because, and I've said before, we meet on the gig, we play the gig, but I never get a chance to really have these in-depth conversations.
Right.
But one of the common denominators for a lot of the older guard piano players, and again, that's not a dig, it's just, I was born in 78, they're older than me.
Yeah.
But they had an association with the great pianist Jerome Gray. Did you ever meet Jerome Gray or know about
I did
him
not.
at all?
Was that a local legend? Yes. Yeah, and Jack Brownlow and, and some names that I hear come up, but it was before I arrived in 2000.
And from my understanding, he did play with Charlie Parker back in the day and then moved out here later. I don't remember what year this happened, but he taught everybody, not just pianists too, but I was curious if you had ever crossed paths with him at all. Or
No. Is he still living or?
I believe so.
Oh.
I believe so. But
wow.
I don't know how to get in touch with him. Or
Yeah,
maybe someone watching does. I would love to do that.
Yeah, we piano players never see each other. We always kid about that. There's only one to a gig, and so unless you're calling them for a sub or it's a jazz festival with multiple rooms or something where you can go hang a minute, like I made an appointment with Bill Anshell, to just meet him for coffee and talk about stuff. Or now I'm doing this, another one of Greta's staples is this week-long thing we do in Blaine up at the Canadian border. And so Randy Halberstadt's there and Jovino Santos Neto's there. And so, you get to be around other piano players for a week, And I think it would be great and probably intimidating, if there was like a Seattle Jazz Piano Society where we all just got together and, played for each other, and talk about the instrument and everything.
Well, my thing about going back to Jerome is people that had studied with him. He had a lot of profound things that he would use to teach people. And for me, in my mind, it's just not losing that information, keeping
Right.
that. There's so many different ways to do this and so many different perspectives, but compiling it so that people can still benefit from it and grow and get stronger as musicians and educators.
Yeah, and you would hope that if the artists themselves don't really have the time or inclination to, document, codify their methodologies. I'm thinking of like Barry Harris, the student that I have at UPS just really follows Barry Harris. And there's a lot of videos of him, talking about stuff. And I think I heard a rumor about somebody that used to, hang is taking upon themselves to, make a book of a dissertation or something, of his methodologies. And I've yet to do that myself. There's so much out there. You get on YouTube and everybody, the ones that particularly get me is that say, forget all this theory, you can do, you can learn to play jazz in 20 minutes or something. And then they always end up talking about, scales and modes and the same thing everybody else talks about. But I can tell you about sort of a methodology I latched on to if we have time to get into it. Yeah.
We do have time. Yes, we've got about 15 minutes. We got a few minutes, and I'm going to open things up for questions.
Okay,
and if there's no questions, we'll just keep rolling.
Sure. Well, this is what I'm pursuing. So, like everybody else over the years, I would collect jazz piano method books. So there was this guy in Chicago named Alan Swain. And this was back in a day, when I guess a jazz piano teacher at a big music school was like the Maytag repairman, the loneliest guy in town, I think of John Mahegan, who was at Juilliard in the 50s, But, the foreword to the book was like by Leonard Bernstein and everything, so obviously well respected. And so there was this guy, Alan Swain, and he put out a 6-volume thing. I bought the first couple. And he talked about the 4-way method, and it's visual, oral, tactile, intellectual. Now, it's the kind of thing it might seem like a ruminating on the obvious, but when I look into it and I apply it, so basically, like, and we're talking piano here, say your saxophone where you put your fingers in your home keys there and you're looking out this way. You're not, really doing that business. But, the piano, somewhat with a guitar, but particularly with piano or a vibraphone or something, it's a very visual instrument. It's a landscape. It's our bodies, we're nothing but a bunch of receptors, and so that's where this four-way thing comes in. So you've got this visual system, and I'm not only talking about the landscape of the keyboard, the arrangement of 2 black keys, 3 black keys, and things like that, but there's also, like, the way your hands look on them, that your longer fingers are stretching out to the black keys. That's the reason, I think a lot of, like, say, ragtime and early pieces were in heavily flatted keys, because it's horrible to read, which is the other visual system, when you have this candelabra for a key signature, but it feels real good under your hands. I mean, to me, the whole world should be in E flat. That just feels fantastic to me. I can play an E flat all night. It just feels marvelous. But anyway, there's that visual system. Even like how your hands are turned. If these fingers are tucked under a little and these fingers are out. I mean, that all registers when you're internalizing your music. And then, of course, the other visual system is the notation. Now, I found the problem with that is, with young players, is that is code that tells them what button to push with what finger. And so that becomes strictly a mechanical thing, dots to what to push down. Like my youngest son, he was doing trumpet in junior high, and I said, what's a C or something? And, and he just thinks of what buttons to push down, So you're not really thinking about, what it is in relationship to a key or something. So anyway, so there's the visual part. And so say a pianist, when they're doing, say, a little cluster, like say it's G, A flat, and C, and then they're going to transpose it up a fourth where they're playing C, D flat, and F, and say, look, your hand position and the way it looks on the keyboard is exactly the same to move it up. And again, those are relationships that just helps you get to the music quicker. Tactile, which is, of course, muscle memory, just practicing it until your fingers know where to go. So, that's an easy one. Oral, I mean, this is an oral art form. And so, again, another disconnect with so-called formal training is little Billy or little Jenny takes up the cello or something, and they give them their cello book. And you open it up, page 1, and, here's a G, and here's your G string, and then don't do anything until next week at your lesson when we turn the page and go, all right, now here's a A, put your first finger, like that. And so you don't do anything until the book tells you to. And instead of giving you the cello, say, go out under a tree and see what all kind of noises the cello makes, and just mess around. And so that intuitive thing, Matt Wilson has this great little thing, where he puts instruments, act like you just landed from Mars and you don't even know what these instruments do, and just walk up to them and mess around with it. And so they're just doing all kinds of things to the bass and the piano other than what you do. And then, of course, just picking stuff out by ear, just, trusting your ear. So you hear a tune you like on, and I'll tell classically trained kids, this, well, what's a song, by anybody, what's a song you like? Have you ever just picked that out on your instrument? Oh, no. So that's the oral part. And the thing about the oral part, particularly in improvisation, is we live in 3 tenses at once. You think back to what you just played, and now you're playing this, and that's already telling you what you're going to play next. So your intuitive ear, your ear that's proof checking what you're doing against what you're seeing and where your fingers are going, that I meant to play a major 7th, but my ear said, no, that's what a dominant 7th sounds like. Oh, change that. You might not know what's wrong because you're not kicking in the 4th step, and this is what Alan Swain was really pounding the table about, is people that just think jazz is we're just playing any old thing because we're making it up as we go, and all like that, but they don't realize, the huge thing of being a composer, in the moment. And so where intellectual theory is not just this ghettoized skill set like it is in music school, where you're sitting there taking dictation and studying form and everything like that, that for us to play on a standard or something, we have to understand form. We have to understand harmonic progression. We have to understand what scales go with it. Now, on top of all that stuff, just to play correctly, you've got to say something. And so all that has to be, taken into mind. So if you can constantly go, if you have a failure in reading the music, it's like, hurry up and see what that sounds like, and if you relate better to that, try to get off the page as quickly as you can. And then if you look at the pathways on your hands, you can do that. Now, Art Tatum and George Shearing didn't need that, so obviously that's a workaround, but you can, how strong their tactile, thing must have been. But I found with my students that if I had them constantly cross-check, just moving back and forth between these four perceptual methods is really, really strong. And I think I've taken it a lot farther than Swain did. He sort of introduced it at the front of the book and then just went on teaching everybody scales and chords like everybody else does. But I've kind of gotten a little obsessive with that four-way approach and applied it in a lot of things and seen results almost immediately. So I think it's really a good approach.
I have many more questions, but I don't want to hog all the time here. Does anyone here in the theater have a question or online have a question? Feel free to put it in the comments. Yes, sir.
Hi.
Thank you. I was here for a second. That was perfect. Because I am a music lover, and I have a few questions.
Okay.
I am a new melody music lover.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, I love the classical music, Bach, also Beethoven.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of catch the essence when they have pieces of the piano. But I was thinking that you are bringing to this topic today, and that's my question. I'm sorry my ignorance is, how do you see first the piano, and second, I was thinking because I love jazz.
Mm-hmm.
How a jazz player will see the piano? And then you were answering me the question in your last exposition about the four principles.
Mm-hmm.
How you sense it? First, because for me it's an intrigue instrument, the piano.
Mm-hmm.
I can in my mind maybe imagine or listen the violin, the cello, other instruments of drums.
Mm-hmm.
But the piano for me has kind of, kind of mystery. How a musician see it or feel it, or describe it. Sorry, my question.
No, it's a good question.
Yeah.
So for those of you that are watching online, they can't hear it in the theater. The question is, as a jazz musician, correct me if I'm wrong, how do you visualize or hear the piano in your head?
And because for me it's kind of an instrument. And second, how you bring in the jazz, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's another, like, it's
Yeah.
timing for me.
Yeah, well, so it sounds like, the question is, here's classical over here, and you want to kind of go over the fence to jazz, how you get into that world. And I think I somewhat addressed it, that even really, really good classical musicians that respect jazz, but they haven't done it, a Yo-Yo Ma or, somebody that wants to get into it. Improvisation is a pretty high wall. Like when I teach my jazz piano students, I can show them real cool voicings for their chords and some stylistic things and get them to where they really sound quite professional doing that. But when they go to improvise, and I think in a way it comes to us so intuitively that yes, we the measurable part, like in a jazz school, what they test you on, you can say did you have the right notes in the chord, or did you play the right scale with it? There's these measurable things, and then there's just the sort of irrational part about where, again, you're saying something. And that's where I employ compositional tools. That's something I try to get my students to think about, how to build phrases. And transcription is good, the way a lot of jazz musicians learn is that you listen to the great masters play, and of course they created it in the moment in the studio on a recording, that if they came back 10 minutes later and you asked them to do the same thing again, they couldn't do it. It's like a dream state, that you can wake up from a dream and not really remember what the dream was, but you can just sort of remember the feeling from it. Or I say it's like driving at night with your headlights on. You can see about 50 feet in front of you, and you drive that far, and you can see another 50 feet, and you drive that far, but you can't see a thing behind you. And there's been times, where I got really lucky, the muse was good, and I played something that I came away with a feeling about, wow, I really did something. The audience went nuts and everything else, but it's just lost to history because I have no idea what I did, And so it's very mystical. And so when someone wants to get into improvisation, I think you have to have a bit of a predisposition about it, and I think probably you really have to want to say something. You can learn a language, learn to speak or something, but not particularly be a public orator, And I think to do improvisation, you have to have a lot of that, to really say something compelling. Now, you can be very academic and play all these licks you've learned, and that's the way we start out. And any student should go unabashedly through their imitative phase. It's what Lester Young called it, being a repeater pencil in his typical way. And Miles Davis said you have to play a long time before you can play like yourself, And so at first you play all these licks and things, and then somehow, if you're creative at all, your own style sort of comes out of that, But it's a long, slow process in a way that it sort of has to gestate. There's some famous jazz musician, maybe Sonny Rollins, that said, if I'm thinking about it, I'm not going to play a good solo. Or Charlie Parker, who said, learn your horn, learn your music, forget all of that and just play. So this sort of Zen position of when you're improvising. And I do know that even to this day, if I overthink it, if I'm really trying hard, and oh my gosh, how many times have we been in a situation where it's an album date or it's a big concert and you're so self-conscious about it and you're really thinking about and practicing what you're going to improvise, and maybe it goes okay, and then there's the time where you plop in on a club to see some friends play. It's your night off, you got a couple of drinks, and they ask you to come sit in, and you go, well, it's not my gig, and you're just going to go up there, whatever, and you're brilliant. And you just, it's so frustrating, So I would just say that, the Rosetta Stone for improvisation is listening, both to pick up the style and to pick up the vocabulary. And play that, and eventually, it will just come out in your playing. But I think the most elusive part of what I term improvisational behavior, so learning to improvise, can be all of those kind of mechanical things like transcribing solos and what all. I've tended to find when people transcribe someone's solo and they learn to play it and it's absolutely perfect, they sound just like the person on the recording. And I say, great, you learn the Sonny Stitt improvisation on I Got Rhythm. Now, you improvise. We'll assume that this is soaked into your bones. Na 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 na. They can't do anything because they've learned it as an etude. Just like classical music. Yeah, great. You had the ear to transcribe it and you did that. Another big problem I see, say particularly with horn players, is they'll transcribe a Sonny Rollins solo and then they call me up and ask me what chords go over it. And I say, you mean you didn't look at what the chords were that this is overlaying? So I always tell jazz students, think horizontally and vertically. So yes, look at it as a melodic line, you know, what the relationship, what the phrases are and what the shape of the line is. That's all very, very important compositionally. But also you should look at every note in that solo and look how it relates to the chord underneath it. You know, when does it step between the chords and go to the next chord tone or whatever? You know, so you need to analyze all of that too. Because if you just learn it without asking all those nerdy questions about how is this working, you're not going to own it. You know, it'll never totally belong to you. You just become, once again, a parrot that doesn't know what it's saying, but it's just saying it. You know, so I hope that addresses your question. It still remains a mystery, that's for sure, but that's, you know, really the best answer that I can give you. With that four-way approach, you know, that intellectual is really important, but after you've gotten all of that into your lizard brain, then you just take, you know, your romantic right brain thing and just go. And because real-time performance, whether it's drama, plays, or music, and maybe even somewhat, you know, with visual art, is that, you know, we're manipulating an audience. You know, we're compelling them in some way. And the best solos can be few notes, but something of real profundity. And I think to be a musical actor you know, being able to yank at the heartstrings, you know, that glib stuff about, you know, emotion and everything, which sometimes can get left out in academia. But I remember a voice teacher next door to me at North Texas had a sign on his door, said an academic performance is an inadequate performance.
Going along with what David was saying, you know, he mentioned, you know, you're coming up with phrases. When we think about this in terms of music, think about it like sentences, right? We need to, if we are going to make musical sentences, we have to know words. Now, you can learn a bunch of words, but if the words don't make sense, like I could say cat, house, ball, jump, dog, revolution, it means nothing. It's all context. And so we have to learn the words, but then also learn how to put them together in a way that makes sense. And even like right now, I'm talking to you, I haven't practiced this conversation with you. So think of like the topic of the conversation is the song, and we're communicating with the notes or the words that we have to make sense. And it works the same way with rhythms and notes. So we could have all these words, but I'm not going to go practice the conversation I'm going to have with you. I know the words, and I know how to communicate using those words, and it works the same way with notes and rhythms. So you have to learn these things either through scales or patterns or pieces that you've learned or parts of an improvisation. All of that becomes part of your language, and then you don't even think about it. You just know it so well that you can react in time, and that's the spontaneous composition aspect of it. So all the things that David's mentioning are ways to help develop that vocabulary for yourself. So does that help?
Yeah, too much. That for me is an analogy and a lot of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
When I hear it, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful to be here by serendipity. My daughter maybe pushed me, hey, get out of here. It's a teenager.
That's it.
We need to connection.
Mm-hmm.
It's a connection. I didn't know. I sensed in the jazz before, but I
Mm-hmm.
had the opportunity to ask.
No, I'm so glad you asked. Yeah.
This is why we're here.
That's right.
That's
And I
the
wanted to
point of
tell you
today.
another thing about improvisation too. And I said, you know, that we're, you know, our bodies were just a bunch of receptors. And so I talked about things about seeing the piano, you know, hearing things. And then, you know, within the tactile thing, it's like my musical decisions and the way I'm going to react is going to be, what's the piano like? You know, now, Kareem has got a huge advantage in that his instrument is with him all the time. He knows that thing so intimately. And I walk into a place and they, you know, the piano's provided, you know, and it could be anything. I mean, it could be a great piano, but the sound of it, the feel of it is a totally different thing, and I'm going to react and make my musical decisions work around or bringing out the best qualities of what that piano does, you know. So, and then another thing that that I love about improvisation is there is your own imagination. There's these things that you recall, that you've heard and that you've learned and that you decide to play. And then this is the most fun for me. I play the piano. I can never play with another musician again, and I can get gigs. It's a complete instrument. It's the accompaniment. It's everything. It's a percussion instrument. It's beautiful, But I pretty much came up playing jazz piano in an ensemble situation. And so if the musicians are bad, then it's bad, okay? But when the musicians are really good, and I'm getting ready to play with 3 other really fantastic musicians. One, Jacques. Hey, Jacques. I haven't played with him since we did a gig in Bakersfield, California, with these 2 guys. That's the last time I saw Jacques. And he is an amazing drummer. And I can hardly wait, for his particular brand of energy. And that's going to make me, even a tune I've played 1,000 times, I'm going to play it in a different way because of, okay, what am I going to play next? I told you about that. You're sitting there, you're playing what you're playing. What am I going to play next? And there can be some little something he does in the way he's playing the drums, or whatever Kareem just finished off with before I came in, and it's just input. It's just, wow, thank you for that. I never thought of it that way. It's just like when you go in and you say something you've said 1,000,000 times, and somebody gives you a comeback that, oh, I never thought of it like that. And then it completely changes this thing that you said over and over again. So it's a dialogue, it's communication. Fred Hirsch says it's a romance, and I think that's absolutely true. You come off of a really great gig of playing with some other musicians, and there's just this afterglow is all I can think of. That is just, man, that was just beautiful. We're tough old jazz musicians, or like that. But believe me, we're going, baby, that was beautiful.
We're getting close. We need to wrap up to get ready for the concert that starts in about 55 minutes. Are there any other questions, either in person or online? There are some online questions. Yes. Oh, question?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is more, I can't follow that question. But how hard is it to get a job after you complete your doctorate in studies at a major institution?
So the question is, how hard is it to get a job after you've completed your doctorate and academic studies at an institution?
Hard. There's generally, I've been on a lot of search committees, and there's 200 applicants for any job. And say, when you're on the search committee or something, the easiest thing to do to make the first cut is just take out everybody that doesn't have a doctorate. Does that mean doctoral people are smarter or better than the ones that got cut? No, it doesn't. It's the game. Because to make you have a doctorate makes my doctorate have worth. Welcome to the club. And it's enlightened places like music schools where somebody has such a history of performance and achievement that they will dismiss that and hire them as faculty. But say at PLU, one of the gals that came up through the choir, the West, Angela Mead, she's now a big star at the Metropolitan Opera, but she wouldn't qualify to be a voice teacher at PLU because she didn't have a doctorate. But anyway, like I say, that's kind of the game. That's the best way to make a first cut. The ones that might get under the fence are what's called ABD, all but dissertation. So somebody that's right at the end of their doctoral thing, and they're applying because they're about to get out in May, and they want a gig in September. And so they're throwing their hat in the ring. So you study up and make darn sure that they're going to, you talk to their dissertation advisor, say they're not going to backslide or anything. They are going to be through by, and they go, yeah, it's looking good, So it's like anything. It's it's a competitive world. It's tough. Even at the just Podunk University in the middle of nowhere. The upside of it is, you can be in the middle of nowhere at Podunk University, and it's very likely you'll get a Juilliard-trained doctoral piano teacher because they're looking for a gig.
Other questions? There's online questions. Yes.
Yeah, so Jared online asks, what are your top 3 favorite authors who have published materials regarding either jazz composition or taking current compositions and bring them into a jazz context using reharmonization?
Oh my God! I'll try to do this. What are your 3 favorite? I'm just saying this for the folks online. That,
Yeah.
What are your 3 favorite authors that have what? Okay, let me see that.
I think
Do this
I got
justice.
enough of it to sort of
All right,
answer.
What are your top 3 favorite authors who have published material regarding either jazz composition or taking current compositions and bringing them into a jazz context using reharmonization?
Okay. Well, I can't think of, there's books on jazz improvisation, which is sort of jazz composition. And then there's books on jazz arranging, orchestration, and things like that. But as far as something on jazz composition, and it's of my own ignorance, I can't think of anything. The closest I could think of is Ray Wright, who was the longtime jazz arranging composition teacher at Eastman. I think he was the one that did it. He had a book called Inside the Score, and he took a Sammy Nestico and a Bob Brookmeyer and maybe Thad Jones and just analyzed those big band compositions to a Fare Thee Well, probably both compositionally as well as orchestrationally. So for jazz composition, that might be, a winner. For reharmonization, again, there's tons of books out there, but if you want something that's really simple, and this isn't a bias just because I taught with him for 14 years, but Dan Hurley, who was the longtime piano and jazz theory guy at North Texas, and a dear friend, he just passed away just a few months ago. When I was in high school, my band director handed me this little thin book called Jazz Rock Voicings for the Contemporary Keyboard Player. And just in a nutshell, it taught me everything I needed to know about reharmonization, just with a few examples. So sorry I can't be more help there.
I'm reading the questions here. All right.
Yeah.
We were over by almost 15 minutes. Not to be rude. If there's more questions in the comments, we'll get to those.
Oh, goodness.
We need to take a short break here to
Yeah.
get ready to do the performance, which is going to happen in about 45 minutes. So thank you for those of you who joined us in person today and online. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, David, for joining
You're
us again.
welcome.
It's been long overdue. Glad we could make it happen.
Well, you ask a
today.
PhD what time it is, we tell you how to make a watch.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, we're going to take a short break and get the concert started here in about 45 minutes or so. And thanks for joining us. See you again soon.